Welcome back. Really seeing a lot of your feedback on the future of the education sector and, of course, its current state as well. Please keep sending them. 22422 is the SMS line and the hashtag is Newsnight. Let me read one or two more of your thoughts. This one coming in. Let's have that up on the screen. Okay, there it is. Nisa Ria is saying, adjusting to the new normal, kids to stay home and choosing prefects at home. Wow. While parents are teachers, doctors, police, etc. Felix Juma is saying, at least if candidates only would have reported to school in September, it would have been easy for the social distancing they're talking about. Next year now, they are opening for everyone at once. Will there be social distancing or will they have built more facilities? That's a concern from Felix Juma. And one here from Frisch is saying, as a parent, what will happen to parents who had paid school fees for the whole year, 2020? I am an example of that. I have a Form 1 and a Form 4. Kindly give a response to what should happen. Let me, of course, bring back Professor James Ole Kiapi, former PS Education, who's still with us on the line. Prof, your thoughts? Parents, we've talked about how this move was very important, especially for students, for teachers, but there are parents tonight who are concerned about their fees. They paid a year in advance. Some maybe even just paid fees for one term, and they are concerned that that fees is effectively lost. What should happen in a scenario like that?
In my view, the fair thing the ministry should do is that parents who have paid fees for, say, first term, should not have to pay again first term next year, because that money is with the school. And you know that the schools were closed abruptly in mid-March. And therefore, whatever fees was paid for, that fees should be with the schools. I mean, let's say a parent has paid for a whole year. Where has the money gone? They have the receipts. So I really feel that this is, again, where the ministry also has to be now equitable in terms of thinking about the plea of the parents. So that, again, I don't think there are very many parents who have paid all their fees. And I don't even think there are so many, for example, who have that kind of issue. But for first term, those who have paid, really, in my view, I think children should just go where they stopped and start there, and that it is counted that was paid for, and then you start paying for second and third term as we normally do.
Does the ministry have...
That's really how I would expect the ministry...
Would the ministry have the power to enforce that, especially when you look at private schools, Prof?
Private school is a different matter, because there are actually some that people already paid for, and they were offering some kind of online learning. So it's a diversity of situation. And there were also some schools where there was some kind of negotiation between parents and the school. So really, I think that I was more concerned about the public schools, because it was a more generalized situation. Now, when you come to the private schools, again, it will become a case by case, depending on where the school and the parents were at the time the schools were closed. But I know those who already paid because of online service, and there were those who paid because they willingly want to keep their teachers on, let's say, some rate. So I think it's a diversity of things, and I think there has to be understanding on both, on the side of schools and on the part of parents.
Prof, as we mentioned earlier, the COVID-19 pandemic has exposed the gap in our education facilities across the country. But some would also say it's exposed the gap in terms of access to education, for different groups within the country as well. I mean, let's look at it this way. On one hand, during this break, from the time schools were closed in March, some students have been busy day in, day out doing online classes because their parents can afford that infrastructure. But on the other hand, some students, possibly a majority, haven't touched a book. For them, their parents might have put them to work, carrying out duties in the farm, etc., to try and, make some money, or at least, keep things flowing at a time like this. How do we deal with these inequality concerns in the education sector that is in Kenya in 2020, Prof?
That's why I mentioned and I talked about equity. Equity is everything in education, because if you do not guarantee every child in Kenya quality relevant education, then there is a very serious weakness there. And I think it has been there for a while, and we were always raising the issue that why don't we raise the standard so that even the parents that are not able to provide the support system that others are able to, even those parents as well may feel that the education system gives their children a chance. I think it is something the government of Kenya has to look at very seriously going forward. Now, on a larger issue, you said that the COVID-19 has exposed our system. Actually, even in the best countries like South Korea and in the UK, even in America right now, kids are at home. That there was in South Korea where they opened schools, children went in for a bit, and then they closed in shortly after. So COVID has given the whole world a new normal in almost everything, in terms of business, in terms of health, in terms of social relations, and of course in terms of education. So, and that's why we keep saying, this is now where it hits home, that this is not life as we know it. This is a new normal. But finally, Waiga, when we haven't emphasized that a lot in Kenya, we really need to expand our curriculum to include what is called life education. Education being part of a larger thing rather than the four wall called a classroom. So that a child who goes to the shamba and learns how to, say, grow vegetable has actually acquired as much skill and education in a broader sense as maybe the one who has read a book, and maybe in some cases, that kind of child is actually ahead. So it is because of our narrow selective education that we feel like some children are losing and some are gaining simply because we judge them on one parameter called holding a book or being able to have a computer. But I feel that education in Kenya needs to be much broader and bring on board these life skills.
Prof, a very interesting point that you brought there. I'd be keen to hear from the other panelists, and maybe we can start with Amos on his thoughts on that as well. And Amos, even as you respond to what Prof has said there, you can also give us your thoughts on this. I'm getting a lot of messages here, especially on social media, from teachers from the private sector. Yesterday, we interviewed two of them who told us they had already been evicted from their homes because they have not been paid since March, and they don't see them, with this announcement, they probably won't be paid until next year. What sort of options do they have at a time like this?
Thank you, Wahiga. I really sympathize with my former colleagues because I also worked in the private sector. Unfortunately, those teachers are just victims of our own mess. They are victims of the wrong decisions that we have made. I should start first of all by saying that this parallel system that we have created called the private school system, it is not sustainable and it's not good for this country. We cannot have education being hawked to the highest bidder. Education is supposed to serve an equalization function. Because if you let education to be dictated by the market forces, then it reaches a point where even inequalities in a way end up to be excavated. We must even have stringent and even more tougher measures on the people who want to set up private schools and the people who actually want to engage in that service. But let's flip the coin and ask this, that come January 2021 and all the Kenyan public decide that they want their children to go to public schools. The reality of the matter is that even in this city of Nairobi, 65% of the children attend private schools and the low-cost private schools. In those slum settlements, basically even this city does not have schools. And it's the typification of almost all our urban areas where our planning does not factor in social services. We see even our children have nowhere to play. So we have basically built a private system which is not complementary to the public school system, which is completely unacceptable. There is no society or there's no country that has developed by using the private system of education to give an education to their citizenry. We must have an education that serves everyone. But is that what we have done? I don't think that we have done that. Is there a better way we could do? Yes, there is a better way we could do. Because there are two basically fundamental issues. You have got people who have money and they want to invest. So how do we facilitate the people with money in their pockets or the people with money or the financial institutions to make sure sure that that money is flowing to go to support the public school system, where they are still guaranteed that they will have a return on their investment in what they have put in our school. And I don't think that our government, or specifically the Minister of Education, has been quite innovative in terms of bringing these issues to the table, so that those who are interested in ensuring they can get a return on their money are able to avail this money to the public. You cannot have inefficiency that we are witnessing right now. Public schools that don't have basically classrooms, they don't have those, and yet private schools are mushrooming everywhere. And they are mushrooming, again, they are also not economical. Look at the case of here in Nairobi. If you are here in Kilimani, where we are shooting from, the reality is that for you to set up a school, maybe you need to buy 2 acres of land. And if an acre is going to be going for 300 million, how do you secure 600 million to buy 2 acres of land? When will you ever recover the investment that you put into it? Whereas we know that there are public schools which already have got land, they already have got sufficient space that could accommodate another 400 children. And yet this is not happening.
Okay.
So the Ministry of Education right now has got 6 months to begin to reset the baton on some of these things that it has never got right. And if it does not use this opportunity very, very well, of course it knows very well that by the year 2023, by the year 2024, it is setting itself up for chaos. When we are going to be graduating children to go to what we are calling lower secondary, it will be chaos because we are not optimizing this opportunity. There is no better time than a crisis such as right now, that we could utilize it to do something to correct all the things that we have got wrong, and even reset the curriculum reforms so that they are set up on new fundamentals.
Amos,
basically,
Amos, let me ask you this.
To reopen
Amos,
schools in January,
Amos, let me ask you
using
this.
the old normal, we
Amos.
would have wasted the time.
Amos, let me ask you this. You keep referring or pushing the ministry to become more innovative. Some have said the innovation that we've seen this year is that in certain parts of the country, students have been able to do online classes. Now, the ministry has been trying to, in a sense, cure the situation by limiting online classes at this time. They've been clear on that what what you did in an online class will not count when the curriculum restarts. Where do you stand on this whole discussion for those who've been able to go online at a time like this and actually cover a part of the syllabus to a greater measure?
I am sorry to say that there is very little learning happening on online platforms for very simple reasons. Number one, there is no curriculum, or rather those people are not in any tandem with any particular curriculum. So if you ask a basic question, what is the objective of the online learning? Maybe we could just be providing something to keep the children a little bit busy, because we know for a fact that children's retention memory is as good as also how they absorb. So there is the bigger question that we are dealing with right now is the loss of learning. That when children are not exposed to continuous learning, they end up even losing whatever they had learned. I see it with my own daughter because she has almost lost almost 70% of what she had learned in first term. So it's very, very normal for children. So we cannot right now argue that even meaningful learning as far as progression is concerned is happening right now. In fact, secondly, the other thing that we have to consider is what we call consumer protection. There is a lot of proliferation of wrong content that is also happening online. Who is vetting this particular content? We expect that the ministry could be a little bit more proactive in terms of making sure that it's protecting the public from some of these unscrupulous and predatory investors who are hawking all manner of content that we are not so sure whether it is good for human consumption or not. What content is appropriate for 6-year-olds? What content is appropriate for 7-year-olds? So the fact of the matter is that even with some of what is happening right now, there ought to be measures to make sure that we are protecting the public. We should not be celebrating the birth of perhaps another mega scandal of the 21st century where we sell to the public what they are completely unaware of. How do we know if we are just providing a placebo and yet we are trying to convince the public that we are providing education? Okay. So the ministry must also be firm because very few people are implementing perhaps what is on the Kenya Education Cloud, what is supposed to be in line with the curriculum from the Kenya Institute of Curriculum Development.
Yes.
These are discussions that we hope that in the next coming few weeks, in the next coming month, Kenyans will be able to engage in so that we're able to give Kenyans and the Kenyan children the right content or the right commodity that they are consuming.
Okay. Amos, interesting questions that you've raised, and I hope education stakeholders, the ministry, are listening to this, even some of the concerns that you've raised. We did reach out to the ministry to invite a representative of theirs for this discussion, but they did not agree to our invitation. Dr. Tabitha, who's with the Kenyatta University, the Director of Wellness, is still with us on the line. Dr. Tabitha, you've heard what, for example, Amos Kaburu has had to say. His child has not been able to retain a lot of the information they had picked up because of this gap. Now imagine extending this gap to early next year as well. From a mental perspective, how much will children effectively have lost if they're not in school for the rest of this year, possibly early next year as well? And how do you begin rebuilding, those mental muscles?
Thank you very much for that question. For one, I want to appreciate the fact that some children are kept engaged by being online. It can be a plus. But the difficulty in this is that it is not all the Kenyan children who can be online, simply because of the diversities in the background. There are those who can be online because they have the facilities, they have the smartphones, they have the computers, and so on. There are those who are not online because they don't have the facilities and they live very far away from where internet connectivity is found. But let me say this. What is very important for children is the kind of experiences they are taken through, depending entirely on where they are. You can have a child who is in the rural area, and there are things that that child can learn from the environment and things that are going to build that child mentally, physically, and psychosocially. There are things that the children in the urban areas can also learn. And what I had said earlier, the learning is not just the learning of the online, even learning how to do household chores, learning how to cook, learning how to take care of somebody's clothes, laundering, ironing, and so on, learning other hobbies, so that basically in a day, many activities are put in, and also the bonding with the parents, where now is the parent who is the teacher, which is a good thing.
But I guess, sorry for interrupting you, Daktari, and those are very good activities that you're speaking of, but the concern for some would be after this break, the muscles that they were used to exercising in class might not have been used effectively, and it could affect their performance in 2021. In case a parent today has such a concern, what would you tell them?
I would tell them that the child's brain is still young, and the young brain will still catch up when that time comes.
Okay.
And basically that they should not be worried about the lost time. They should be worried about the circumstances, so that they themselves understand that this is not loss that is intended, and that this is not loss that cannot be, that the brain cannot catch up. The child's brain will always catch up, given the right environment, given the right experiences. And actually, my hope is that the teachers will be aware of this and be able to know how to help the children bridge the gap, so that by the end of 2021, there will not be like there was any gap that was lost.
That's very reassuring, Daktari, I'm sure, for lots of parents watching this program tonight. Even as we wrap up this discussion, I've got one or two questions for each of the guests, for each of the panelists, before we look at the feedback. Professor Kiapi, Elijah Ikiburu asking, why couldn't the government test what students have learned instead of making a whole generation stand still? I mean, what is so important with basic education exams where no skill is tested? That is a viewer feeling that there were other ways to go around this problem. Prof, how would you respond to them as we wrap up this discussion?
I think very quickly, everybody has raised the issues about the challenges in the education system. And Waika, I want to emphasize and tell you that the problems we face in the education system did not begin this year or 5 years ago. They started way back in 1963 when we got independence. And we have been facing these problems, and that there's not going to be a silver bullet that will you just shoot and then you solve all these problems. You're going to require a very serious plan, and that is well thought about, and that you will follow through over time. Now, to answer your question, again, we are getting into the trap of these reactive actions where let's get them to do exams. So what? After they do exams, where do they go? Those who do standard 8, after they do the exam, never mind that they didn't cover the entire year. So next year you want them to go to Form 1. And that is what the ministry said, that there is already congestion in Form 1 because they are now pushing all the children, those who have very high marks and everybody who finishes going to secondary school. Where are you going to accommodate them? And thirdly, we are still losing fact we are still getting lost of the fact that we are in very unusual times, that we are dealing with a global pandemic that is going on in the country, in Kenya right now. The numbers are increasing, and we just don't want to tempt fate. We don't want to experiment with the children. They still have a chance to learn next year and do their exams and transit on to secondary and others to university. So in my view, there is really no crisis as far as learning is concerned, and it is going on. Never mind that it is not necessarily math or English, even though a bit of it is happening, but there's learning going on. The kids have not shut their brains. There's still learning going on. Prof, and let's be gentle on the system and understand the peculiar circumstances we are in, and let us not try to address everything at once. Let us address this crisis first by making sure that we bring kids back to school when we think the risk is as low as possible.
Okay. Prof, as a final word, how would you advise the nation in terms of better preparing for things like this in the future? Of course, nobody hopes that we'll ever have another pandemic like this one, just in terms of how disruptive it's been and the loss of life it's caused. But just in case, how do we prepare ourselves better?
As a country, we have always been caught off guard, whether it is flooding, and some of these things are predictable. For example, I think Amos mentioned earlier that we have now this new system of education. How has the ministry prepared for these kids when they go to junior secondary and then while at the same time there is the current system going, and who is going to go to technical and who is going to go what? This needs to be figured out, not on the year when that happens, but in fact years before, and the plan is tested and it is clear and the pathway well defined. For next, and for the pandemic as well, for the pandemic, it took the whole world by surprise. Nobody planned for this. You will always have emergencies taking place. However, going forward, we must always use the good times to prepare and invest in good infrastructure, whether it is health, whether it is education, whether it's food security. We always have an opportunity to harness the opportunities we have so that we don't get into sudden cyclic problems that appear like they are strange, while in fact we could have foreseen and anticipated and prepared for them.
Prof, thank you so much for those thoughts. And same question to Amos. What lessons can we pick here for our education sector to make it adaptable to future disruptions?
Thank you, Wahiga. There are several things that we have to do. One, we have to make sure that we have an education that works for everyone. Number two, we now recognize that school is an existential threat to education. So how do we begin now to mediate the increasing role of parents and communities in terms of educating their children? We have seen the role that parents have played in the last 3 months, and they are still also going to play that role for another 6 months. So why did we have to make school to teach children everything? Why do we assume that school should be the place where even children are taught how to sweep houses, where children are taught even how to greet each other or even how to wash hands. So how do we begin now to negotiate such that certain things can now be given up by the school, so that now school can concentrate on teaching the hard stuff and perhaps also teach us the element of cooperative learning and other social skills, as opposed to really doing the kind of things that we could be doing at home. So if we are able to achieve that, we'll really achieve much. Secondly, how do we reduce the adversarial nature of the private and the public school system, so that we can have more resources flowing into the public school system? And lastly, how do we achieve what we are calling the element of blended learning? Is it maybe the highest time when we open, we make sure that every school, at least once every month, is able to ensure that learning is happening on technology? Maybe if we had done that, today it will be a different story. We are not going to reopen the discussion around laptops. That is what they say, yaliondwele sipite. But we have another opportunity that we can do something to make sure that at least every month, or maybe at least every week, there is something that is happening using technology. And that way, we are sure that even when there are such major disruptions happening, at least some form of learning will continue to be happening. But this kind of just assuming that everything will work and always happen because it has worked, why fix it? I think it ends up getting us really in a terrible situation as we are in right now.
Lots of thoughts there, definitely, for the education sector. And of course, Dr. Tabitha, even as we wrap up with you, talk to us a little bit about what parents will need to do to protect their children mentally. One, from the stress, obviously, of COVID-19, not being in school, candidates who won't get to sit their exams. But also there have been lots of concerns about possible abuse that children are now more prone to, being out of the familiar environment of school, being at home, sometimes without parents as well. Just briefly touch on that as we wrap up.
Thank you very much. This happens to be the time when parenting is really going to be tested. Tested because when parents have children who are in the adolescence, whether they are boys or girls, there is trouble. But unfortunately, and I always say this, parents are usually worried about the girl child who they want to keep in the house, doing one chore or the other. They are not much worried about the boy child, simply because of the cultures that seem to tell parents, mwanaume ni mwanaume. And therefore, there is a very big risk of the boy child to get out there, get to bad gangs, get into drugs. And parents need to be aware that the people who are now joining the gangs that go stealing cars, that go armed with guns and everything, are actually teenagers from age 13. And for that reason, it is important for parents to actually just know where their children are, what they are doing, and I say mentor them and monitor them. Mentoring, meaning train them in the things that are important for this age. Monitor, find out where they are, who they are with, and what they are doing. Because many times when parents are following up what the girls are doing, is because of the fear of pregnancy. And really, we know we have a problem in this.
Okay.
Already, there is hue and cry. And we are wondering, in the next 6 months, how many more? That too can be arrested if the parents are actually doing their parenting role, taking care of their girls and their sons and their daughters, and training them, and knowing where they are, what they are doing, and actually working with them, bonding with them. This is the time that parenting is really tested, when parenting is really needed, when parenting will bear the fruits.
Daktari, thank you so much. You've really raised a lot of thoughts that point to 2020 being a most complex year for students, for teachers, and for parents as well. Thank you so much for that discussion. We've just had Professor James Ole Kiapi, former PS Education. I also said a former presidential candidate. Prof, we'll have you back on Newsnight at another time for discussion on the state of the nation as well. Thank you for heeding our invitation today. That also has been Dr. Tabitha Wangeri, Director, Wellness and Rehabilitation, Kenyatta University, and Amos Kaburu, an education expert with the PAL network. Thank you to each of you for sharing your thoughts. And of course, lots of feedback on social media as well. This is what Kenyans are saying tonight. All right, Fred Osiro saying the extension of school's calendar shouldn't be seen as a delay. We may have time to recover what's lost academically, but we may not be lucky to recover lost lives if schools are to be open in September. Okay, let's take a look at another one. Gure Wanganga says, Magoha has exaggerated school reopening. What new thing will the government implement before the 21st of January? Can the salary for public teachers be shared with their private colleagues as a sign of goodwill? Wow, that is a controversial recommendation. Enoch Kilia says, I hope someone from the Ministry of Education is taking note of insights from Amos. As a country, we ought to learn from this pandemic. We have to reflect on new innovative ways to expand our education infrastructure amid an increased population. Okay, we've got some SMSs here, 22422. John is saying, why don't they come up with the idea of joining the candidates in one center so that they can sit for exams next year in April? Okay. Lots of thoughts there. Emma is saying the government should take advantage of the 6 months before 2020 to improve on various challenges the education sector is facing, including infrastructure. All right, so those are your thoughts. Thank you so much for sharing them, and thank you for having watched Newsnight today at a time when the education sector is reeling from that announcement from the Ministry of Education. The school calendar has been cancelled until 2020. And of course, those are some of the thoughts of stakeholders in the sector. Thank you for watching, and thank you for your thoughts as well. My name is Wahiga Mwaura. On behalf of the whole team that's made this program possible, asante sana, stay safe, and have a good night.